The first two studies on inflammation and the effect of ISIS were carried out by Charles River Laboratories in early 2013. These results were reported by my graduate student as his doctoral dissertation. The scientific model used in these studies is the standard model used by the pharma industry to screen for anti-inflammatory drugs. It's an 8-hour test to see how much the drug reduces inflammation after the injection of a molecule called carrageenan. This very carefully controlled, formal scientific study had both a positive control and a negative control. A positive control tells you how good you could possibly expect an outcome to be if everything goes perfectly right, and a negative control tells you what you would expect to happen if you didn't do anything. So if you look at the graph, the negative control is in black. That's where they injected just saline, just salt water that was expected to do nothing. And the positive control is in red, which is a steroid. In this case, it was dexamethasone at a very high dose. And that is thought to give just about the best anti-inflammatory response you could ever hope for. Right in between the two, you see the effect of ISIS. Now, it's very important to note that's the lowest dose ISIS we can deliver. Higher doses, we found in subsequent studies, give better and better anti-inflammatory effects. In this case, ISIS was about 60% as effective as a megadose of steroid. The director of the research laboratory at Charles River Labs reported to me that they had actually assessed the effectiveness of many other electromagnetic systems to see whether or not they would suppress inflammation. He told me that although he could not name the specific products, he did say that none of the products they had ever tested ever had any significant measurable effect on inflammation. He went on to say this was actually the most exciting data he had ever seen from a medical device. These experiments were carried out using Generation 4 ISIS technology from early 2013. Our current product is actually Generation 5, which is significantly more effective than Generation 4. In a second study at Charles River Laboratory, we were able to show there's a dose-response effect of ISIS. That is to say, above a certain minimum threshold, increasing ISIS increases the biological effect. This is one very tried and true method for telling whether or not something is really working. The results of this study had two very important, valuable outcomes. The first was, we learned a lot of information that told us how to improve ISIS, so we were able to make significant improvements that have resulted in Generation 5, which is our current level of ISIS technology. The second outcome of this study was that it proved beyond doubt that ISIS is effective at suppressing inflammation. It does so quickly and effectively and repeatably, and there's a dose-response curve, and we now understand how it works in biological systems. The biological mechanisms of inflammation, though not fully understood, are currently the subject of very intensive research in hundreds of labs, if not thousands of laboratories all around the world. There are many different types and mechanisms of inflammation, but you can kind of break it down into two basic categories. Acute inflammation is what happens right after an injury. It's normal, and it's an essential component in the natural response to injury and infection. Acute inflammation is characterized by being very short-lived, and it quickly gives way to normal processes of growth, healing, and repair. Chronic inflammation, on the other hand, is a very different biological response. Increasingly, people are realizing that it's actually abnormal. It's entirely unlike acute inflammation. It's harmful. And as you get older, it can be progressive over years and decades. It causes cellular and organ damage. It's at the root of hundreds of different diseases and all kinds of disabilities, and it plays a role in the progression of major diseases such as cancer, autoimmune disease, neuropathies, chronic pain, and most of the diseases associated with aging, as well as many other diseases. Looking at chronic inflammation in more detail, the first thing you notice is that chronic inflammation is a known cause of chronic pain. Chronic pain is a much bigger problem across the world than most people realize. It is larger than the 4 largest medical conditions that afflict humans. If you take all the patients with diabetes, all the patients with heart disease, all the patients with cancer, all the patients with stroke and dementia and AIDS, and you add them all together, it's still smaller than the number of people who suffer from chronic pain. It turns out that about 1 out of every 3 adults across the world suffers from pretty important severe chronic pain. It's a very major issue, and it's thought to cause a loss of almost $560 billion per year from the American economy. That's about 3% of the American economy lost every year due to chronic pain that can't be treated effectively. Chronic inflammation is also now increasingly associated with a tremendously wide range of diseases and disabilities. Diseases that people thought had nothing to do with one another, like arthritis, cardiovascular disease, neurological diseases. Chronic inflammation is associated with virtually all diseases of aging. So chronic inflammation appears to be the common denominator that we've been looking for. It's associated with hundreds of different disease states, affecting every organ system and interfering, increasingly with age, with the natural healing processes.